Hey everyone, in this video I'm gonna show you how you can create a cinematic hybrid Bram that sounds like this. In this video I will only use free plugins so you can download them all and easily follow along in the process and create your own cinematic Bram. We will create this Bram sound in 4 steps. Step 1 is to create a sound in Vital. We set up the oscillators and all the internal effects. In step 2, we move out of Vital and do some post-processing to that synth sound. In step 3, we shape and process the organic recording to our likings. And in step 4, we layer both sounds together and do some additional processing to them. Alright, let's start with that Vital sound. The idea with the synth patch for a cinematic hybrid Bram is to cover almost all frequencies, from the low bass up to the high noisy high end. And we will use distortion and compression to beef up the sound, and then we will use filters in order to be able to control the high end and the high mids, both so we can perform the sound for the track, and also so it's easier for us to layer this sound together with the organic sound later on. So let's start with the oscillators. We start out with oscillator 3, it's a bit backwards, but I just like to work downwards and upwards, and this is the bass layer. So this is just a sine wave, 1 octave down, just in mono, just to have that stable foundation. And for the next oscillator, we want a bit more frequency-rich wavetable. So I choose the sawed wave, and this is detuned a slightly bit from the original one, but it's also 1 octave above. So still not super interesting at all. And for the next and third oscillator, we have this set to the same octave as the second one, but slightly detuned in the other directions. We create a little bit more movement. We have 5 voices to this, so a bit of width to this. It's really nice to have that in the upper region of your sound, and then slightly detuning. So now it sounds like this. Just a slightly bit of movement to the sound and slightly bit of width to the sound, but still that solid foundation in the bass. So that's actually it for the setup of the oscillators. It's a really simple setup. It's just to have that clean bass and that width in the high end, and then just a dense frequency spectrum in between there. So now all these 3 oscillators are routed into filter 1. So with filter 1 it sounds like this. Just controlling that high end. And filter 1 is going into filter 2. And here we add some drive and a little bit of resonance to it with this dirty notch bend. So just a bit more character to it. And then that's it for the first page. So let's head over to the effect side and let's beef it up with some compression. Adds a bit more character to the high end, brings out some details there. And then some soft clipping with a distortion. And now all the detuning really shines. It creates that wobbliness and all the kinds of weird movement to the sound. So let's control that high end a bit more with a third filter. A little bit of drive, but this is mostly there to be able to control the high end. Now I wanted a little bit of attack to the sound, and we can use the same technique as we use when you create sub-booms and percussive sounds in synths. We can add some pitch modulation with a sharp envelope. So I used LFO1 in envelope mode with a really sharp and steep envelope here, and then I modulated the pitch of Vital with this. So in order to do that, you need to head over to the matrix, set source LFO1 and destination voice transpose. That way you modulate the pitch of Vital. So now it sounds like this. Just a tiny bit more attack, so I wanted more. So I took the same LFO one more time and I just modulate the mid-band of the compressor with that. So slightly bit more attack to the sound. And what I wanted next was to be able to control all the high end in this sound. We have so much distortion and modulation and those frequency dense wavetables up there with the sawtans. That sounds really incredible, but I need to be able to control it because they can be a bit harsh. So I set up a macro for this. So this macro here is called filters, and it controls the cutoff of this third filter, but it also controls the blend of the first filter. So if I play with that a little bit, we can see what it does. So it's an easy way to perform the sound, and you can of course do it the way I do here, just grab it with a mouse, or you can set it up to be controlled with your mod wheel, or you can automate the macro, or you can modulate that with another LFO or whatever you need. But it's really easy to just have one parameter to either perform or modulate. So now we're actually done with all the internal processing in Vital, but I don't feel that this sound is finished yet. I need more power, more dirt, more like over the top feeling of it. So I went out of Vital and started to post-process it a bit. And I started out with some phase distortion. And this is a really cool distortion plugin. It doesn't do the distortion with ordinary amplitude, where you push an amplitude into something, and when the thing can't handle enough of the amplitude that you send into it, it starts to create overtones and weird stuff to it. This instead lets the phase of the signal modulate itself. So it reminds much more of frequency modulation than ordinary distortion. So it has a different vibe to it. So with this, it sounds like this. So really cool. Really like gritty. I really like the sound of that. After that, we have some OTT. Just beef it up, brings out those high end. A little bit of filtering, just to control the high end once again. And last out, a big reverb. Valhalla Supermassive, amazing reverb. So, a big, gritty, cinematic Bram. But this is just one of the layers. So let's continue with shaping up the organic section of this hybrid cinematic Bram. So for the organic part of this hybrid sound, I made a brass recording a while back, and it was a little bit special. I asked my friends if anyone like played any brass instrument in school, and it was a couple of them that said, yeah, I played a bit, but I haven't played like in 10 years. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. So I brought them into the studio, and we had a bunch of brass instruments, and they weren't allowed to prepare themselves in any way or like warm up or anything. And then I just handed them a couple of instruments, and the session was just to play individual notes, like one shots. And the reason that I did this was that I didn't want a professional brass recording with like clean pitches and really solid notes. I wanted all the weirdness when they get tired, when they can't pitch, when they can't find the notes, when they don't know the instrument and it just creates weird textures. All that stuff that you can't really do with a professional because they are so trained and so drilled to do the perfect thing. So in this case, I tried to guide them a little bit to play as high as you can, try to like reach notes that they really couldn't reach and stuff like that. And it created a lot of cool stuff. So one of the sounds from the recording is this. And it has that like really cool airy tone to the tail of it. So what I did was that I just pitched it down one octave, and it sounds like this. And that's kind of cool, but it's not there yet. So one more octave. And now it sounds really flipping cool. We have all that wobbliness in the end when we stretch out the sound, and we have a more deep sound, but I thought that we can just take it one more step and just pitch it down one more octave. So now it sounds like this. and that's kind of amazing. And that's just like one French horn with a guy who haven't played it in like 10 years, recorded at a high sample rate. So super cool in my opinion. So I went with that octave and I start to process that a bit. So I edited the sample a tiny bit just with some fades, and then I started with some plugins. And I started out with phase distortion, the same plugin that we used for the vital layer. And now it sounds like this. Once again, really cool character out of that plugin. A bit of OTT. A bit of ladder filter, just controlling the high end. And then a big reverb. Supermassive sounds so good in my opinion. Amazing. Then I just distorted that reverb a bit. So that's a cool thing that you can do. You don't always need to have the distortion in front of the reverb. If you have it after the reverb instead, you create a totally different vibe because now you're distorting the full tail of it. I mean, is it realistic? No, of course, but it sounds flippin' amazing. So I really like to distort it after the reverb instead of before. And then I added a pitch shifter, 1 octave up, but this is, as you see, just 29% wet. So this will add one more layer above this, so it sounds like this. And this is also another thing, I mean, the common thing to do is to have, if you work like this, have like the pitch shifter in the beginning of the chain. And I played around with different versions of this, but I found that for this sound, the best results come from having that last in the chain. So don't just settle in on the things that you used to do with like the distortion first, and then some EQ, and then some compression, and then reverb. Try to mix stuff up and see what happens. See if you can get more character out of it. See if you can get closer to your vision in your head with a different order of the plugins in your chain. Alright, so now it's time to take our two layers, the synth layer from Vital and the organic recording of the French horn, and put it together and create one cohesive sound out of them. So most often the synth layers will become the low layer of these sounds because we have that stable mono sub bass in those, and that works really well for the low end. So that's exactly what happened in this sound too. So I automated the filter macro that we set up in Vital a bit, just to have them like move over time a little bit, so they are really low in the beginning and then they come up and then they go down again. So if we just listen to the Vital layer, it sounds like this. So it's that deep brammy sound underneath this. And the only thing I did to the organic French horn was, when I put them together, I realized that the phase distortion was a bit much in the end, so I just automated out a bit of the drive in the end there. So that sound like this. And together they sounded like this. So not much work to do with it, it sounds great. So what I did to the bus here, I added the GVST mono bass and then a limiter. So together with the bus processing, it sounds like this. So it just tames like 1 or 2 dB on top there. So at this stage I felt that the sound was done. It was big, fat, we had everything that we need, the character, the power, everything. So I bounced it out and I took a short break, and when I came back to the studio and listened back to it, I felt that there was some noise in the sound that I thought that I could just clean up with some RX plugins. So I tried that. So I used the RX declick and RX decrackle, and then I just put a security limiter on the end there, but it didn't do anything. So the final sound is this. And the one with the noise is this. And I think it's just a combination of OTT and the phase distortion that do those weird artifacts that I didn't really like. And that's just part of it. When you're in the process, it's easy to miss stuff. And I do it all the time. And then you listen back to it and you realize, whoa, that's not that good. But there's almost always a way to fix it or go back in process. So yeah, that's the final sound. So there we have it, a big cinematic Bram just created with free plugins and a recording of a guy who hadn't played French horn for 10 years.